When we take a look at the multi-core performance of AMD processors like the Ryzen 3900X and 3950X, it's a pretty clear win when you compare that to Intel's current flagship offering in the same market. Simply put, if you're a creative professional, you can quite easily put money back into your pocket with the amount of time saved with these CPUs. And let's not even begin to discuss Threadripper, because those CPUs are truly in their own category. So why then, if these new Ryzen CPUs are so great for creative professionals and multi-core workloads, why have I not myself migrated from my 9900K machine to something with a 16-core 32-thread 3950X? And for those wondering, it's not because these CPUs are harder to cool. The 3900X and 3950X are actually pretty ITX friendly. This is something that a lot of you guys have asked me about. Why do I still use an Intel CPU in my main machine that is used for video editing? And I'm going to explain exactly why today with some performance comparisons, but I'm also going to explain why I do expect to be making the switch sometime this year. So before we dive into some performance comparisons and explanations, let's take a look at my current gaming and editing rig and some of the more demanding workloads that it's responsible for. I'm currently using Intel's i9 9900KS slotted into the Asus Strix Z390i motherboard, along with 32GB of memory and 2TB of M.2 NVMe storage. On the flip side, we've got a liquid-cooled RTX 2080 Ti with 11GB of GDDR6 memory. It is important that I mention the memory there because aside from gaming, this GPU is leveraged for a ton of compute work for daily use. Now, this might surprise a few of you, but when it comes to gaming, I'm all about 1080p 240Hz in competitive first-person shooters. Simply put, I want the system with the lowest latency possible, and when it comes to the majority of first-person shooters played at a high refresh rate, Intel's 9700K and 9900K are still the best options. Now, to be fair, AMD isn't far off on average, and for casual gamers, the difference won't be perceivable. But if you do fall into the slim percentage of users like myself who are using an RTX 2080 Ti to game at just 1080p with low to medium settings to get the highest refresh rate and lowest latency experience possible, then it only makes sense to pair it with something like a 9900K or 9700K because that's going to give you the best results. The CPU is responsible for sending out draw calls to the GPU under gaming workloads, and when it's doing that at over 200 times per second in addition to other tasks, clock speed and single-threaded performance will always come out on top. The common thought then is, why would I give up, having double the core count on a mainstream socket, 16 cores here for the 3950X, and potentially having a much faster video editing machine? Why would I give that up just for 10% to 15% of FPS in games? And the answer to that is that after actually taking a look at the benchmarks for the editing software and encoding settings that I use, I don't actually gain any benefit from an increase in core count at all. So my editing software of choice is DaVinci Resolve Studio 16, and this software does an absolutely amazing job at leveraging the parallel compute power of the GPU. Looking at timeline playback of 6K Blackmagic RAW footage, it's seriously as real-time as it gets with no room for improvement. We can also see how little the CPU is loaded during this task at around just 15% utilization, whereas the 2080 Ti sits at around 1/3 usage with half the memory capacity taken up. Again, this is fully graded 6K RAW video. When it comes to tasks like video stabilization, the GPU is responsible for basically all of the compute workload here too. Upgrading to a higher core count CPU wouldn't net you an increase in performance here. One area where you will see an increase in performance though is video encoding or exporting, but that's if you're using the CPU as the encoder. For example, when we encode in H.264 using the CPU, we do get a chunk of time saved over the 9900K, and this would definitely scale the larger and more complex that your project grows. However, with an NVIDIA GPU, you can leverage the onboard encoder to export in H.265 at seriously lightning speeds. Even a beefy 2080 Ti gets a pretty nice workout here with encoding capacity pretty much maxed out, The 9900K on the other hand barely sits at 60% usage. Now while you won't see any real benefit by upgrading above say an 8-core CPU in DaVinci Resolve Studio because it is mostly a GPU based program, the same cannot be said for Adobe's Premiere Pro. That's an editing software where the results do speak for themselves and where I think a Ryzen 9 3950X would be totally ideal. However, you really could not pay me to go back to using Adobe Premiere Pro. It's an unbelievably inefficient video editing software, and the amount of crashes that I had using that software, I mean, it just cost me so much time and work. So if you are an editor yourself, I would highly push you in the direction of DaVinci Resolve Studio. So those are the two most frequent use cases for my system: high refresh rate gaming and video editing in Resolve Studio. However, there are other less frequent use cases of the system which are equally, if not more computationally demanding. For example, streaming. While traditionally a high core count CPU has been the go-to if you're looking to live stream your gameplay to a service like Twitch, that all changed when Nvidia updated their NVENC encoder at the same time as their RTX launch. In short, I've found this to be an incredibly efficient way to live stream games. It requires less power and you actually get better frame rate performance overall. But with all of this in mind, I am still expecting to switch to an AMD Zen 3 CPU later this year when they're released. Of course, we have no idea what the performance is going to be like. It's going to be an iteration on their current 7nm architecture, but with the current trajectory of Ryzen at the moment, we can only expect a serious stab at Intel, if not for the improvement in performance, but at least for the efficiency. At this rate, I am expecting AMD to at least tie the 9900K in gaming across the board, not just in some titles like it does at the moment, whilst being more power and thermally efficient. To be honest, I'm also really itching to jump at an X570 ITX motherboard, seeing as Z390 ITX options are fairly stale in comparison. So that's currently where I'm at with AMD Ryzen CPUs and my own workflow, and kind of explaining why I haven't made the switch. My current workflow is mostly revolving around GPU compute, and where I do need a CPU, or sort of the most demanding CPU based task that I have, is high refresh rate gaming, and it's pretty well established at that point that the best option there would be a 9900K. So as always guys, a huge thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.